A canine dog is injured by cruel bikers, unaware that his trainer will show no mercy. The golden hues of the setting sun stretched across the empty highway, broken only by the menacing roar of motorcycles. In the center of a circle formed by the notorious Steel Serpents gang, Hank, a battle-hardened canine German Shepherd, stood his ground. His fur was matted with dirt and blood, his powerful frame trembling with exhaustion, but his eyes remained sharp and focused. Despite the pain coursing through his body, years of training and an unshakable spirit kept him standing as the gang jeered and taunted. Across the road, hidden in the dry brush, James Harlow watched intently. The former military veteran turned federal agent was known for his calm demeanor under pressure, but today was different. Rage simmered beneath his calculated exterior as he watched his partner know his family surrounded by these criminals. Every heartbeat felt like an eternity, but he knew rushing in recklessly would only endanger Hank further. One of the bikers, a burly man with a snake tattoo coiling up his neck, stepped closer to Hank, swinging a heavy chain. The wounded dog let out a deep, defiant growl, drawing mocking laughter from the gang. They had no idea that this moment would trigger a chain of events that would unearth long-buried family secrets and force long-lost brothers to confront their shared past. James Harlow never wanted to follow in his father's footsteps. Growing up in a small town in Montana, he'd watched William Harlow leave for weeks at a time on classified missions, returning with new scars and fewer smiles. But the day his family shattered when his older brother Ryan was taken away by their father after the divorce, something changed in young James. The empty chair at the dinner table and the silence in the bedroom they once shared became daily reminders of what he'd lost. By 18, James found himself standing at the military recruiter's office, just as his father had done decades before. Not out of duty or patriotism, but driven by a deeper purpose to understand the world that had torn his family apart. The K-9 unit wasn't his first choice, but fate has a way of choosing paths for us. During his second tour in Afghanistan, a German Shepherd named Duke saved his unit from an ambush. The incident awakened something in James, a recognition of the pure, unconditional loyalty that he'd been searching for since childhood. After returning home, James discovered his father had died in what was officially labeled a training accident. The funeral was small, attended by a handful of stern-faced men in dark suits who offered rehearsed condolences. His brother Ryan was notably absent. James knew the official story was a lie. William Harlow had been too experienced, too careful for a training accident. But every attempt to uncover the truth hit a wall of classified documents and tight-lipped officials. It was during this dark period that Hank came into his life. The German Shepherd was part of the last K-9 unit his father had trained before his death. Something in the dog's eyes reminded James of the unwavering determination he'd seen in his father's gaze. Together, they rose through the ranks of federal law enforcement, becoming one of the most effective handler K-9 pairs in the department. Each successful mission felt like a step closer to the truth about his father's death, though the path seemed endless. But James carried another burden, a worn photograph of two young boys building a snowman, their laughter almost visible in their frozen smiles. He kept it in his wallet, a reminder of the brother he'd lost and the family that had crumbled. Every now and then he'd hear rumors of a highly skilled operative named Maddox, whose description matched what Ryan might look like now. But James had learned long ago that hope could be more painful than acceptance. Now at 35, James had built a reputation as a man who could be trusted with the most sensitive cases. His colleagues respected him, but few got close. Only Hank truly knew the depth of his handler's pain, the nightmares that still woke him, the quiet moments when he'd stare at that old photograph, and the unspoken fear that someday he'd have to choose between justice and family. The day James met Hank wasn't in some polished training facility or carefully controlled introduction. It was in the aftermath of a failed operation, where smoke still clung to the air and the taste of defeat was bitter on everyone's tongues. The German Shepherd had been part of his father's last K-9 class, and something in the way the dog held himself proud but wounded struck a chord in James's heart. Hank had already washed out of 3 handler partnerships. The trainers called him too intense, too protective, labels that made James think of his own reputation. The dog's file was filled with notes about his inability to trust new handlers, his tendency to make independent decisions in the field. But when their eyes met through the chain-link fence of the K-9 facility, James saw something familiar, the same loneliness he carried within himself. Their first training sessions were anything but smooth. Hank tested every boundary, challenged every command. But James recognized the behavior for what it was: not defiance, but a desperate need to prove his worth. One rainy evening, after a particularly frustrating session, James sat down in the mud beside Hank and just talked. He spoke about his father, about Ryan, about the weight of expectations and the pain of loss. The dog listened, head tilted, eyes never leaving James's face. From that moment, something shifted between them. They became inseparable. Where other handlers kept professional distances, James and Hank developed a bond that went beyond commands and responses. Hank slept at the foot of James's bed, alert to the nightmares that still plagued his handler. During operations, they moved as one, communicating through subtle gestures and shared instincts. Their success rate became legendary within the department, but it was the quiet moments that truly defined their partnership. There was the Christmas Eve when James, alone in his apartment with case files spread around him, felt the familiar darkness creeping in. Hank had nudged his hand until James finally put the files away, and they ended up watching old movies until dawn. Or the time Hank refused to leave a crime scene, leading James to discover crucial evidence that had been overlooked. The dog's intuition often seemed to border on supernatural, though James knew it was simply the result of their deep connection. But it was during a border operation gone wrong that their bond was truly tested. Trapped behind enemy lines, James took a bullet to the shoulder. Without hesitation, Hank dragged him to safety, standing guard through the night until help arrived. The doctors later said that without Hank's body heat, James would have succumbed to hypothermia. That night cemented what James already knew: Hank wasn't just a partner or a trained asset. He was family, perhaps the only real family James had left. It started with a routine weapons trafficking case. 3 shipments of military-grade weapons had disappeared from a secure facility in Montana, the same state where James's father had trained his last K-9 unit. The initial investigation pointed to the Steel Serpents, a motorcycle gang that had evolved from petty crimes to sophisticated operations. But something about the case felt off to James from the beginning. The evidence was too clean, the patterns too obvious. During their surveillance, James noticed the gang members weren't acting like typical arms dealers. They moved with military precision, used tactical formations that spoke of professional training. Hank sensed it too. His behavior changed during their stakeouts, showing the same alertness he reserved for high-level threats. One name kept appearing in their investigation: Thompson Holdings, a private security firm with government contracts. On paper, they were beyond reproach, but James recognized their CEO's name from his father's funeral, one of those stern-faced men in dark suits. When he tried to dig deeper into the connection, he hit walls. Files disappeared, witnesses became unavailable, and his supervisor started suggesting he focus on more productive leads. Then came the photographs. They arrived in an unmarked envelope on his desk, surveillance shots of him and Hank during operations that were supposed to be classified. Mixed among them was a yellowed newspaper clipping about his father's training accident. The message was clear: back off. But James had inherited his father's stubbornness, and these threats only convinced him he was onto something big. The real breakthrough came during a raid on a Steel Serpent safe house. While the gang members had fled, they left behind a laptop. The data was encrypted, but one file name caught James's eye: Project Guardian W. Harlow. The same project his father had been working on before his death. Before he could dig deeper, orders came from above: surrender all evidence to a special task force immediately. That night, reviewing his case notes at home with Hank lying vigilant at his feet, James connected the dots. The weapons, the gang, Thompson Holdings, they were all pieces of a larger puzzle. His father had stumbled onto something a decade ago, something worth killing for. Now, those same shadows were circling again, but this time James had something his father didn't: an unshakable partner in Hank, and the burning determination to uncover the truth, no matter the cost. What he didn't know then was that the case would lead him not just to answers about his father's death, but to a confrontation with the brother he'd lost so many years ago. The pieces were in motion, and the stakes were higher than he could imagine. 2 weeks before the highway confrontation, James and Hank tracked the Steel Serpents to an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town. The typical signs of a biker gang were their motorcycles, crude graffiti, empty beer bottles, but something else caught James's trained eye. Hidden among the chaos was a level of organization that seemed out of place: sophisticated security cameras disguised as broken light fixtures, communication equipment that belonged in a military compound, and guard rotations that followed professional protocols. "This isn't just a gang, is it?" Boy James whispered to Hank as they observed from their hidden position. The German shepherd's ears twitched in agreement, his body tense with the same suspicion that nagged at his handler. During their surveillance, James noticed a pattern. Every Thursday at midnight, a black SUV with diplomatic plates would arrive. The driver, a man in an expensive suit, would meet with Stone, the gang's leader. These meetings never lasted more than 10 minutes, but afterward, the gang's activities would shift dramatically: new shipments, different routes, changed protocols. The breakthrough came when Hank's keen nose led them to a hidden basement entrance. Inside, they found evidence that shattered their initial assumptions. Detailed maps marked with military installations, dossiers on high-ranking officials, and most disturbing of all, a file with William Harlow's name on it. The file was empty except for a single photograph: James's father shaking hands with a younger Stone, both in military uniforms. But before James could process this discovery, Hank's sudden alertness warned him they weren't alone. They barely escaped as armed men in tactical gear, not bikers, swept through the building. These weren't ordinary criminals, they moved like special forces operators. That night, reviewing the few documents he managed to grab, James found a name that made his blood run cold: Ryan Maddox, listed as a primary asset with a note that made James's hands shake: family connection to be leveraged if necessary. The Steel Serpents weren't just a gang, they were a front for something much bigger. And somehow both his father's death and his long-lost brother were connected to it all. The USB drive lay in James's palm like a lead weight, a small black device that would change everything. After the confrontation on the highway, as he tended to Hank's wounds in the veterinary clinic's back room, he finally had a chance to examine what had been left behind, deliberately or not, by the Steel Serpents. "Easy, buddy," James murmured to Hank, who whimpered softly as Dr. Emily Watson cleaned a particularly nasty cut. The veteran vet had been treating their injuries for years, no questions asked. She was one of the few people James trusted completely. His laptop hummed to life, and the contents of the drive began to unfold before him. The first folder contained surveillance photos, hundreds of them. James and Hank during operations, at home, even buying groceries. Some dated back months. But it was the older photos that made his breath catch: William Harlow at various stages of his life, including ones James had never seen before. The second folder held financial records showing millions flowing through shell companies. Each transaction was marked with a simple code: Guardian Payment, the same project name from his father's last assignment. Among the payment records was a recurring name: Thompson Holdings, the security firm whose CEO had attended his father's funeral. But it was the third folder that made James's hands shake. Titled Family Matters, it contained detailed dossiers on the entire Harlow family: his father's military career, his mother's disappearance, which they'd been told was a car accident, his own service record, and most surprisingly, surveillance photos of Ryan, now known as Maddox, meeting with high-ranking military officials. A document dated 1 week before his father's death caught his eye. It was an email exchange. W. Harlow becoming liability. Knows too much about Guardian. Son R. agrees containment necessary. Proceed with exit strategy. The implications hit James like a physical blow. Ryan had been involved in their father's death. But why? The Ryan he remembered had idolized their father, following him around like a shadow. James, Dr. Watson's voice broke through his thoughts. Hank's ready to go, but he needs rest. Whatever you're involved in, she hesitated, concern evident in her eyes. Be careful. James nodded, closing the laptop. The USB drive had given him answers, but they only led to more questions. One thing was clear: he wasn't just dealing with a corrupt gang, or even a criminal organization. This was personal, a family tragedy decades in the making. As he helped Hank into his truck, a text message arrived from an unknown number: "You have questions. I have answers. Midnight, where it all began. Come alone." Below was an address James recognized instantly: their childhood home in Montana. The drive to Montana was long and tense. Every mile brought back memories: summer baseball games, Christmas mornings, the day Ryan left. Hank lay in the back seat, still recovering but refusing to let James face this alone. The old family house appeared unchanged, a two-story colonial with peeling white paint and shutters that needed fixing, just as their father had left it. James parked a safe distance away, scanning the area. The porch light was on, casting long shadows across the overgrown lawn. "Stay alert, buddy," he whispered to Hank, whose ears were already pricked forward, sensing the tension. The front door creaked open before James could reach for it. Inside, the house smelled of dust and abandonment. Family photos still hung on the walls, frozen moments of a happier time. A figure stood by the fireplace, his back turned. "Hello, little brother." The voice was deeper than James remembered, but unmistakable. Ryan turned and 20 years melted away. The same strong jaw, their father's eyes, but there was something hard in his expression that hadn't been there before. Why, it was all James could manage. "It's not what you think." Ryan moved closer, stopping when Hank growled softly. "That email. Dad wasn't killed because of me. I was trying to save him." The explanation spilled out. Their father had discovered Project Guardian wasn't just about weapons trafficking. It was about control blackmail material on high-ranking officials, judges, anyone who could be useful. The Steel Serpents were just the muscle, the visible face of a much larger operation. When Dad found out, he tried to gather evidence. Ryan continued. "I was already inside the organization. They wanted me to handle it, thought family ties would make it cleaner. Instead, I warned him to run." His voice cracked. "But he was too stubborn, said he had to protect both of us." "And Mom's accident?" James asked, dreading the answer. Ryan's face darkened. "Wasn't an accident. She found something in Dad's papers after his death. They made her disappearance look like a car crash," but he paused, reaching into his jacket. James tensed, but Ryan just pulled out an old photograph. "She's alive, James. In hiding. And she's been watching over us the whole time." The photograph showed their mother, older but alive, taken just months ago. On the back was written, "The truth will set us free. Trust no one but each other." "Why come forward now?" James demanded. "Because they're closing in. The USB drive wasn't dropped by accident, it's a warning. They're reminding me they can reach anyone, even my own brother." Ryan's eyes fell on Hank. "Your partner there wasn't randomly targeted. He's connected to all this too, in ways you don't even know yet." Before James could respond, Hank's ears suddenly perked up. Outside, the sound of approaching vehicles broke the night's silence. "They followed you," Ryan said grimly, drawing a weapon. "Time for a family reunion will have to wait, little brother. Right now, we need to survive the night." In the small veterinary clinic on the outskirts of town, James sat beside Hank's bed, his hand resting gently on the German Shepherd's head. The events at the old family house had left them both battered. A desperate escape through the woods, Ryan providing cover fire as they fled from unknown assailants. Now, in the quiet hours before dawn, James watched every rise and fall of his partner's chest, grateful for each breath. "He's tough," Dr. Emily Watson said softly, checking Hank's bandages. "But he needs time to heal properly this time." She hesitated, then added, "James, in all my years treating K9 units, I've never seen a dog fight so hard to protect their handler. He took that hit meant for you without hesitation." James's throat tightened. The memory was still fresh, the flash of a muzzle in the darkness, Hank's lightning-fast reaction, the sickening thud as the bullet grazed his loyal partner. "He's all I have left, Emily," he admitted, his voice barely a whisper. Through the long nights of recovery, James slept on the floor beside Hank's bed. During the day, he pored over the files from the USB drive, trying to piece together the puzzle while his partner rested. Hank would watch him with alert eyes, whining softly whenever James's frustration became evident. On the third night, James woke to find Hank standing shakily beside him, nose pressed against an old photo that had fallen from the files. It showed their father with his last K9 unit, and there in the back row was a younger Hank. "You knew him, didn't you, boy?" James realized, his heart racing. "You were there when it happened." Hank's brown eyes held his gaze, full of understanding and something more, a determination to protect the last remaining Harlow under his watch. As if to prove his point, the dog limped closer, resting his head on James's lap despite his injuries. "Okay, partner," James whispered, scratching behind Hank's ears. "We'll figure this out together. But first, you need to get strong again. We've got a long fight ahead of us." The safe house was one of William Harlow's old properties, a sturdy cabin tucked away in the dense Montana woods. As James carried their supplies inside, Hank limped around the perimeter, his injury still evident but his vigilance unwavering. The late autumn air was crisp, carrying the scent of pine and approaching winter. Home, sweet home, for now James muttered, setting up their surveillance equipment. The cabin held Memory's summer training sessions with his father, weekends spent learning wilderness survival. Now those same skills might keep them alive. Throughout the day they established their routine. James reinforced windows, set up emergency exits, and created hidden caches of supplies. Hank watched every move, occasionally nudging James to show him blind spots he'd missed. Their years of working together had created an almost telepathic bond. "You remember this place too, don't you?" James asked, noticing how Hank lingered near his father's old study. The dog's ears twitched at the question. Inside the study, everything remained untouched: maps on the walls, old case files in boxes, a worn leather chair behind the desk. James ran his fingers along the desk's edge, finding the hidden compartment his father had shown him years ago. Inside was a dusty envelope. The letter inside, written in his father's hand, was dated 1 week before his death. "James, if you're reading this, things have gone wrong. Trust your instincts, they're better than mine ever were. The evidence is hidden where we spent that last Christmas together. Ryan knows part of the truth, but not all. Most importantly, remember what I taught you about loyalty. Sometimes it comes from unexpected places. Watch your back, son. And keep that dog close, he's more than just a partner. Love, Dad." As James read the letter aloud, Hank moved closer, pressing against his leg in silent support. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows. Someone snapped a twig in the distance, too deliberate to be wildlife. "We've got company," James whispered, meeting Hank's alert gaze. Their brief respite was over. Now came the real test of everything they'd prepared for. As James positioned himself by the window, rifle ready, the memories flooded back unbidden. The last Christmas they'd spent together as a family in this very cabin. He'd been 12, Ryan 16. Their father had gathered them in the study, snow falling softly outside. "Boys," William had said, his voice unusually serious, "there's something you need to understand about our family's legacy." He'd opened a hidden panel in the fireplace, revealing a small leather journal. "Sometimes doing what's right means standing alone." The memory shifted to the day everything fell apart. Spring rain hammering against the windows, his mother's tears, Ryan's angry shouts. "You can't split us up," his brother had yelled. "We're stronger together." But their father had been adamant Ryan would go with him, James would stay with their mother. "It's the only way to keep you both safe," William had insisted. Now, watching Hank scan the darkening tree line, another memory surfaced. His father's last visit, just days before his death. William had looked older, worried. He'd brought Hank, then a young military K-9, to meet James. "This dog," his father had said, "he's special. Bred from my old partner's line. If anything happens to me, he'll find his way to you." The pieces suddenly clicked. His father had known he was being hunted, known what was coming. Hank wasn't just randomly assigned to James years later, it had been planned. The dog was his father's final failsafe, a protector and a guide to the truth. A flash of movement in the trees snapped James back to the present. Hank's low growl confirmed that the watchers were closing in. But this time James had something they didn't expect: understanding. His father's words echoed in his mind: "Sometimes loyalty comes from unexpected places." "You were meant to find me, weren't you, boy?" James whispered to Hank. The dog's steady gaze said everything. They weren't just handler and K-9, they were the last line of defense for a legacy bigger than both of them. Through the window, James spotted a familiar figure moving through the shadows. Ryan. But was he here as friend or foe? The answer would have to wait. Multiple vehicles were approaching from the main road. The time for memories was over. Now came the moment to prove whether the bonds of blood and loyalty were strong enough to survive what was coming. The cabin erupted into chaos as the first shots shattered the windows. James and Hank took cover behind the solid oak desk, glass raining around them. Through the chaos, Ryan's voice cut through the darkness. "James, let me in. They're not with me." Hank's reaction surprised James. Instead of growling at Ryan's voice, the dog's tail wagged slightly, his posture relaxed despite the gunfire. James had learned to trust Hank's instincts about people. He nodded to his partner, and Hank bounded to the side door, where Ryan slipped in moments later. "You've got about 3 minutes," Ryan panted, pressing his back against the wall. "Thompson's men, they're here to clean house. Both of us." His face was bloody from a fresh cut above his eye. "Why should I trust you?" James demanded, keeping his weapon ready. "That email you agreed to Father's containment." Ryan's laugh was bitter. "Little brother, you're still reading everything at face value." He pulled out a worn leather wallet, tossing it to James. Inside was a badge James had never seen before, but he recognized the agency seal, their mother's old department. "I was undercover," Ryan explained, checking his ammunition. "Deep cover, just like Mom was. Dad knew he was my handler." "That email was coded. Containment was our signal for extraction. I was trying to get him out, but someone leaked the plan." An explosion rocked the front of the cabin. Through the smoke, James saw tactical teams moving in. Ryan grabbed his arm. "Remember the tunnel Dad showed us at Christmas? The one he said was just for emergencies." James nodded, the memory crystal clear, their father leading them through the narrow passage beneath the cabin, teaching them every twist and turn. "Behind the wine rack," he said. "They killed Dad because he discovered something bigger than weapons trafficking," Ryan continued, helping James move the heavy rack. Project Guardian wasn't about guns, it was about people. High-ranking officials being blackmailed, military operations compromised. Dad found proof that Thompson was selling classified intel to the highest bidder. James froze. "The Christmas gift, the model ship in the bottle Dad gave you. You said you lost it." Ryan's eyes widened. "He hid something in it, didn't he? Classic Dad, hiding the evidence in plain sight. Where is it?" "Safe," James said, thinking of the ship now sitting on his apartment shelf. "But why didn't you come to me sooner?" Before Ryan could answer, Hank's warning bark cut through the air. Footsteps overhead, they'd breached the roof. Ryan shoved James toward the tunnel entrance. "Because they were watching you," Ryan said grimly. "Every move, every day, I had to wait until they made a mistake. When they went after Hank, that was their mistake. They showed their hand." The truth hit James like a physical blow. Every mission, every coincidence that had led him closer to the truth, his brother had been orchestrating it from the shadows, protecting him the only way he could. "Move," Ryan shouted as the ceiling began to crack. "We're out of time." The tunnel was narrow and damp, barely wide enough for them to move single file. Hank led the way, his injury forgotten in the urgency of their escape. Behind them, the sounds of the raid echoed through the passage. "There's something else you need to know," Ryan said as they moved through the darkness. "About Mom's accident." He paused at a junction, checking their bearings. "That night, she wasn't just driving home. She was meeting a contact." James remembered that rainy night 15 years ago. The police at their door, the wreckage photos, the empty coffin at the funeral. "The body was never found," he said slowly. "Because there was no accident," Ryan replied. "Sarah Harlow didn't die that night. She went deep undercover." He pulled out another photograph, illuminating it with his flashlight. It showed their mother, aged but unmistakable, standing in front of a cafe in Paris. The timestamp was from 3 months ago. She was CIA, Ryan continued, had been since before she met Dad. Her real mission was tracking Project Guardian from the inside. The divorce, the separation, it was all cover. They needed to protect us by splitting us up, making it look like a broken family. Hank suddenly stopped, hackles raised. Ahead, a figure stepped out of the shadows. James and Ryan raised their weapons, but Hank's tail started wagging furiously. "Hello, boys." The voice was older, rougher, but James would know it anywhere. Sarah Harlow emerged into the beam of their flashlights, her silver hair shorter than James remembered, her face lined but her eyes sharp as ever. "Mom," James whispered. "We don't have much time," she said, her tone professional despite the emotion in her eyes. "Thompson's men will figure out the tunnel system soon. But first, you need to understand." She pulled out a small notebook. "Your father didn't just stumble onto Project Guardian. I recruited him to help expose it. What we didn't know was how deep the corruption went." Footsteps echoed behind them. Sarah quickly tucked the notebook into James's jacket. "Everything you need to know is in here: names, dates, locations. Your father died protecting this information," her voice caught. "I've spent 15 years gathering the rest of the proof we need. "Why now?" James asked, his world spinning. "Why come back now?" "Because Thompson made a fatal mistake," she replied, checking her watch. "He went after my boys," her expression hardened, "and no one threatens my family." Hank's warning growl cut through the moment. The footsteps were getting closer. "We need to move," Ryan urged. "The old ranger station." Sarah nodded. "Everything's in place there. It's time to finish what your father started." As they moved deeper into the tunnel system, James felt the weight of the notebook against his chest. 15 years of secrets, of planned coincidences and hidden protection. His broken family hadn't been broken at all. They'd been standing guard, waiting for this moment. The old ranger station loomed ahead in the pre-dawn light, a shadow against the Montana sky. Inside, Sarah moved with practiced efficiency, pulling maps and files from hidden compartments while Ryan secured the perimeter. James sat with Hank, reading their father's last mission report from his mother's notebook. "It wasn't supposed to be dangerous," Sarah explained, spreading photographs across a dusty table. "A simple information-gathering operation. William was to inspect the K-9 training facilities that Thompson Holdings had acquired, but he found something in their records." The photographs showed military dogs being trained, but something was off. James recognized the techniques. They weren't standard protocol. They were training the dogs for attack missions, he said quietly. "Assassination runs." Worse, Ryan added, joining them. They were selling specially trained K-9 units to foreign powers. Dogs that could bypass security, take out targets, and disappear. The perfect weapon, invisible and untraceable. Sarah pointed to a particular photo. "Your father discovered the connection to Project Guardian here. Thompson wasn't just selling dogs, he was selling access. Each K-9 unit came with classified intelligence about their targets, security protocols, schedules, weaknesses." James looked at Hank, understanding dawning. That's why Hank was so important. He was part of Dad's evidence. The last honest K-9 from that program, Sarah confirmed. William trained him personally and coded everything he'd discovered into Hank's training patterns. That's why he made sure Hank would find his way to you, James. He knew you'd understand the signs. "The night Dad died," Ryan said, his voice tight, "he called me. Said he had proof that would expose everything. He was meeting Mom to hand it over. But Thompson's men were waiting." Sarah's hands trembled slightly as she pulled out one final photograph. It showed their father in his office hours before his death, placing something inside a model ship. "He knew they were coming," she said softly. "His last act was making sure the evidence would reach the right hands." Hank suddenly stood, ears forward. Outside, vehicles were approaching. "Thompson himself is coming," Sarah said, checking her phone. "He's done sending subordinates. This ends tonight." James felt the weight of 20 years of deception, sacrifice, and hidden truths settling on his shoulders. His father's last mission hadn't ended that night. It had simply passed to his sons. Looking at his reunited family, at Hank standing guard beside him, he knew they were ready. "Dad always said family was about more than blood," he said, checking his weapon. "It's about who stands with you when the darkness comes." Ryan smiled grimly. "Well, little brother, looks like we've got quite a family gathering ahead of us." Through the window, headlights appeared on the access road. The final confrontation was about to begin. The convoy approached the ranger station with military precision, 3 black CVs and a tactical van. In the dim morning light, James counted 12 men in full combat gear. At their center stood Director Thompson, his silver hair gleaming, looking more like a CEO than a criminal mastermind. Agent Harlow Thompson's voice carried across the clearing. "I believe we have some family matters to discuss." His casual tone belied the armed men surrounding him. "Your father was always stubborn about negotiations. I hope you're more reasonable." Inside, Sarah positioned herself at the upper window, rifle ready. Ryan covered the back entrance while James and Hank held the front. The old floorboards creaked beneath them, heavy with 2 decades of secrets. "Your father made this far more complicated than necessary," Thompson continued. "A simple transaction, that's all it ever was. He could have retired wealthy, respected. Instead, he spread his hands in a regretful gesture." James felt Hank tense beside him, a low growl building in the dog's throat. Through his scope, he noticed something that made his blood run cold. Each of Thompson's men had a dog with them. black German shepherds moving with an unnatural stillness. "You see them," Thompson smiled. "The next generation of our program. Perfectly obedient, enhanced with specialized training. Your father's old-fashioned methods seem quaint in comparison." "They're not dogs anymore," Sarah whispered from her position. "They're weapons." "You have 1 minute," Thompson announced. "Surrender the evidence, all of it, and we can avoid unnecessary bloodshed." Resist, he snapped his fingers, and the black shepherds moved forward in perfect unison. James looked at Hank, seeing the same loyalty and intelligence that had drawn him to his partner years ago. These other dogs were empty vessels, stripped of everything that made them remarkable. "What do you think, boy?" James whispered, ready to show them what a real partnership looks like. Hank's response was to press closer to James's side, his posture radiating determination. Above them, Sarah chambered around. Ryan's voice came soft but clear. "Family stands together." Thompson checked his watch. "Time's up." "Such a pity." Like father, like son, he raised his hand to signal the attack. But the Harlows had one advantage Thompson couldn't understand. They weren't fighting for money or power. They were fighting for family, for justice, for the truth. And they had Hank, a dog who chose his loyalty freely. The morning exploded into chaos as both sides moved at once. The first wave hit like a thunderstorm. Thompson's trained dogs moved in perfect formation, but they lacked something Hank had in abundance: initiative. As the black shepherds charged forward, Hank outmaneuvered them, leading them into prepared defensive positions where Sarah and Ryan could pick off their handlers. "They're moving for the east side," Ryan shouted over the gunfire, "trying to cut off the tunnel entrance." James watched in horror as one of Thompson's dogs cornered Sarah, but before he could react, Hank was already moving. The injured shepherd launched himself at his darker counterpart, buying Sarah precious seconds to retreat. The fight between the dogs was brutal but brief. Hank's experience and genuine training proving superior to programmed aggression. The tunnel? Now Sarah commanded, providing cover fire as they moved. "They're bringing in more men." The entrance was hidden behind an old storage cabinet built by their father years ago. As they pulled it open, Thompson's voice rang out again. "Did William tell you what really happened that night, James? How he begged at the end?" The words were meant to enrage, to make them sloppy. But James saw it for what it was: desperation. Thompson was losing control of the situation. In the tunnel, the air was thick with dust and the echo of gunfire above. Hank led the way, limping but determined, while Ryan brought up the rear. Sarah moved with the efficiency of someone who'd spent years planning this escape. "There's a fork ahead," she whispered. "They'll expect us to take the main passage to the highway." "So we don't," Ryan finished, understanding. "Dad's old hunting trail." An explosion rocked the tunnel behind them, sending debris raining down. One of Thompson's dogs appeared in the dust, eyes gleaming, but this time something was different. The dog hesitated, looking at Hank with what seemed like uncertainty. "They can't completely erase their nature," Sarah said softly. "Not even with all their programming." Hank approached the other shepherd slowly, tail low but not aggressive. For a moment, both dogs stood still, communicating in a way humans couldn't understand. Then, to everyone's amazement, the black shepherd turned and ran back toward Thompson's men, barking a warning but not to them. "He's buying us time," James realized. Hank showed him another way. They ran through the twisting passages, the sounds of confusion above growing more distant. When they finally emerged into a small ravine, dawn was breaking over the mountains, but their relief was short-lived. "James," Sarah said urgently, checking her phone. "Thompson's called in helicopters. We have minutes before they spot us." Ryan pointed to an old trail marker, a simple blaze on a tree that matched one in their father's notebook. "Dad's last safe house. It's our only chance." As they moved into the forest, James heard Thompson's frustrated shouts echoing across the valley. Something had changed in this confrontation, not just one dog switching sides, but the first crack in Thompson's perfect system. The Montana forest thick with early morning mist as the Harlow family moved through the undergrowth. The distant thrum of helicopter rotors grew closer with each passing minute. Hank, despite his injuries, stayed alert, guiding them through paths that wouldn't leave obvious tracks. Thompson's changed his tactics, Sarah said, checking the tree line. He's not trying to kill us anymore, he wants us alive. Because we've seen too much, Ryan added grimly. The defected dog, his special program exposed. He needs to control the narrative now. A branch snapped nearby. Everyone froze. Through the trees they spotted 3 of Thompson's men with their black shepherds moving in a search pattern. But something was different. The dogs were hesitating, breaking formation, showing signs of individual thought. Hank's influence, James whispered. They're remembering who they really are. Sarah touched James's arm, pointing to a moss-covered rock formation ahead. Your father's last safe house is just beyond that ridge, if we can make it there. The helicopter sound suddenly grew deafening. Spotlights cut through the canopy, turning the misty forest into a maze of shifting shadows. One of Thompson's dogs caught their scent and barked, but the sound was different, not an attack signal but a warning to them. They're surrounding us, Ryan said, checking his ammunition, using the helicopters to herd us toward their ground teams. James looked at Hank, seeing his partner studying the other shepherds through the trees. The dog's posture wasn't aggressive anymore, it was inviting, teaching. One by one, Thompson's dogs began breaking away from their handlers, some running into the forest, others actively interfering with the search. It's not just about the evidence anymore, Sarah realized, watching the chaos unfold. Thompson's losing control of his entire program. But their moment of advantage was short-lived. A shot rang out, catching Ryan in the shoulder. He stumbled, and James caught him before he fell. Through the trees, Thompson himself appeared, his perfect suit now dirty, his composure cracked. Enough, he shouted. You're just like your father, James. You don't understand the bigger picture. These dogs, this program, it's about evolution, about perfect control. Hank stood between Thompson and his family, and behind him, several of the black shepherds emerged from the shadows, no longer responding to their handlers' commands. They moved to stand with Hank, a silent revolution led by a dog who remembered what loyalty really meant. You see, James said quietly, that's the difference. You tried to program loyalty. But real loyalty, real family, has to be earned. The sun broke through the trees as both sides faced each other in the misty clearing, the moment balanced on a knife's edge. Thompson raised his weapon, desperation in his eyes, as the helicopters closed in overhead. Time seemed to slow as Thompson's finger tightened on the trigger. His shot wasn't aimed at James or Ryan, it was aimed at Sarah, the one person who could expose his entire operation. But Thompson had forgotten about Hank, or perhaps he'd never truly understood what made the old shepherd different from his programmed units. Hank moved with the fluid grace of years of genuine training and devotion. He launched himself through the air just as Thompson fired. The impact knocked Sarah aside, but the bullet found its mark in Hank's chest. The shepherd fell hard, his breath coming in ragged gasps. No, James's cry echoed through the forest. He rushed to his partner's side as chaos erupted around them. The black shepherds, witnessing Hank's sacrifice, turned on Thompson and his men with coordinated precision, not with programmed aggression, but with the natural protective instinct that Thompson had tried so hard to suppress. Stay with me, Boy, James whispered, cradling Hank's head. The dog's brown eyes, still alert despite the pain, locked onto James's face. His tail thumped weakly against the forest floor, still trying to reassure his partner even now. Sarah ripped open her medical kit, her hand steady despite the tears in her eyes. Keep him still, she ordered, working to stem the bleeding. Ryan provided cover, his own injury forgotten as he held off Thompson's remaining men. Your father did the same thing, Thompson spat, backing away as his forces crumbled around him. Sacrificed everything for his principles. And what did it get him? It got him this, James said quietly, still holding Hank. A family that remembers him. A legacy that lives on, and a partner who understands what real loyalty means. Hank let out a soft whine, trying to rise despite his wound. Around them, the black shepherds had formed a protective circle. Their training now turned to a higher purpose. They moved with their own will, their own choices, just as Hank had taught them. The helicopter's almost here, Ryan reported. But it's not Thompson's, he smiled grimly. FBI tactical unit. Looks like Mom's backup plan just arrived. As the sound of rotors grew closer, James looked down at his faithful partner. Hank's breathing was shallow but stable, his eyes never leaving James's face. The bullet had missed his heart by inches, a miracle, or perhaps something more. Just like his father, Hank had known exactly what he was doing, exactly what was at stake. "You did good, boy," James whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "You did so good." Thompson's backup was closing in from the east, their boots crushing fallen leaves as they advanced. The FBI helicopter circled overhead, unable to land in the dense forest. They were running out of time, and Hank needed immediate medical attention. Ryan scanned their surroundings, years of undercover work sharpening his instincts. He saw what the others didn't. Thompson wasn't just backing away, he was moving toward a hidden extraction point. The older man's hand kept touching his breast pocket, where a small hard drive would contain everything they needed to bring down Project Guardian. James Ryan called out, his shoulder bleeding freely now. "Get Hank and Mom to the North Ridge. There's a clearing where the chopper can land." "What about you?" James asked, already knowing the answer from his brother's expression. "Someone has to make sure Thompson doesn't disappear again." Ryan checked his weapon. 20 years, little brother. 20 years I've waited to face him for what he did to Dad." Sarah stepped forward. "Ryan, no, we just got our family back." "And that's why I have to do this." Ryan cut her off, his voice gentle. "Dad died protecting this family. Hank just took a bullet doing the same thing. Now it's my turn." Before anyone could argue, Ryan sprinted after Thompson. The Black Shepherd, sensing his purpose, split into two groups, some staying to protect James, Sarah, and Hank, others following Ryan into the undergrowth. The chase was brutal. Ryan's injured shoulder screamed with every movement, but he pushed through the pain. Thompson was surprisingly agile for his age, but he was panicking now, his perfect control shattered. The dogs herded him exactly where Ryan wanted him to go, toward the steep ravine where they'd played as children. "It was you," Thompson shouted as he ran. "You were the leak all along, my most trusted operative." "I was Dad's son first," Ryan replied, closing the distance. "Everything else was just a cover." The chase ended at the ravine's edge. Thompson turned, his expensive suit torn, his careful facade crumbling. "You could have had everything," he snarled. "Power, wealth, respect." "I had everything," Ryan said quietly. "A father who taught me honor. A mother who showed me courage. A little brother who never gave up on me. And you took that away." Thompson reached for his hidden weapon, but Ryan was faster. The fight was quick and vicious. Both men went down hard, rolling dangerously close to the ravine's edge. In the struggle, the hard drive fell from Thompson's pocket, skittering toward the precipice. Ryan made his choice. Instead of grabbing the evidence, he tackled Thompson away from his gun. The momentum carried them both over the edge. The last thing Ryan heard was James's voice, screaming his name. James ran toward the ravine, his heart pounding in his ears. Behind him, Sarah worked frantically to keep Hank stable, the FBI helicopter's searchlight sweeping the forest. He reached the edge just in time to see Ryan and Thompson tumbling down the steep slope, disappearing into the mist below. Ryan, his voice echoed off the canyon walls. 20 feet down, on a narrow ledge, he spotted movement. Ryan had somehow caught hold of a protruding root, while Thompson dangled from his injured arm. The hard drive lay precariously on the ledge between them. James Ryan called up, his voice strained. "The evidence, get the drive." But reaching the ledge meant choosing. He couldn't save both the drive and his brother. The root was cracking under their combined weight. Thompson's face showed pure terror now, all pretense gone. "Please," Thompson gasped. "I can give you everything, the whole truth about your father's death." James looked between the hard drive proof of everything they'd fought for and his brother's face. Ryan's eyes held understanding, acceptance, even as his grip weakened. "Dad always said family comes first," James said softly. Without hesitation, he began climbing down. "The evidence," Ryan shouted. 20 years of work." "I already have all the evidence I need," James replied, reaching for his brother. "I have my family back." He secured a grip on Ryan's belt just as the root gave way. Thompson fell with a terrible scream, disappearing into the fog below. The hard drive slipped off the ledge, following him into the abyss. With every ounce of strength, James pulled his brother to safety. They lay on the ledge, breathing hard. Above them, Sarah called down, "The FBI team's here. They've rounded up Thompson's men." "You should have saved the drive," Ryan said quietly. "All that proof gone." James helped his brother stand, supporting his injured shoulder. "Dad didn't die protecting evidence," he said. "He died protecting his family. I wasn't going to make the same mistake he did, putting the mission before the people he loved." As they carefully made their way back up, they heard a familiar bark. Hank, despite his wound, had crawled to the ravine's edge, his tail wagging weakly at the sight of them both alive. Besides, James added, reaching up to scratch Hank's ear, "Sometimes the best evidence isn't what's written down. It's what we prove through our actions." Ryan looked at his brother, understanding dawning in his eyes. The truth about loyalty, about family, it had been there all along, embodied in a wounded shepherd who'd never given up on them. The emergency veterinary clinic was quiet in the early morning hours. Hank lay on the examination table, bandaged but stable, while James and Ryan sat nearby with matching exhausted expressions. Their mother, Sarah, paced the room, her phone buzzing constantly with updates from the FBI team. "Thompson's body was recovered," she reported quietly. Along with this, from her bag, she pulled out a waterlogged but intact hard drive. "How?" James asked, sitting up straighter. The black shepherd, Sarah smiled slightly. "They found a path down the ravine. One of them retrieved it before the water could reach it. Seems Hank taught them more than just disobedience." Dr. Emily Watson entered with fresh bandages for both Hank and Ryan. As she worked, she spoke softly. "Your father brought Hank to me as a puppy, you know. Made me promise to keep an eye on him until he found his way to you, James." "You knew?" James asked, surprised. Emily nodded. "William trusted very few people by the end. He knew something was coming, but he wanted to protect you both." She finished, wrapping Ryan's shoulder. "The night before he died, he left this with me." She pulled an envelope from her coat pocket, yellowed with age. Sarah's hands trembled as she took it. Inside was a letter and an old photograph, the entire family at their Montana cabin, both boys laughing as their father taught them to fish. On the back was written, "The truth isn't in the evidence. It's in the hearts of those who choose to stand together." "Dad knew," Ryan said quietly, looking at the photo. "He knew they were coming for him. That's why he separated us, not to break us apart, but to make sure we'd be strong enough to come back together when it mattered." Hank whined softly, drawing their attention. Despite his injury, he managed to wag his tail, looking between the reunited family members with what seemed like satisfaction. He wasn't just Dad's last trained dog, James realized. He was his last message to us. Everything he taught Hank, the loyalty, the protection, the way he brings people together, it was Dad showing us what really matters. Sarah wiped tears from her eyes. "Your father always said that family isn't just about blood. It's about who stands beside you when everything else falls apart." As morning light filtered through the clinic windows, they sat together, sharing stories of William Harlow, not the agent, but the father who had sacrificed everything to give his family a chance to find their way back to each other. Later that morning, in a private room at the clinic, Sarah Harlow sat with her sons as Hank dozed nearby. The time for secrets was over. "I need to show you something," she said, opening a worn leather journal. "Your father wasn't the only one leaving breadcrumbs." She pulled out a series of photographs, laying them on the small table between them. "These were taken over the years," she explained. "Every birthday, every graduation, every important moment I had to miss." The photos showed James and Ryan growing up from a distance, baseball games, military ceremonies, quiet moments they never knew were captured. "You were there," James whispered, picking up a photo of his police academy graduation. In the background, always, Sarah's voice cracked. "The hardest part wasn't going undercover. It was watching my boys grow up through a camera lens." She reached for another photo. "But I wasn't the only one watching." The image showed their father at Ryan's first undercover assignment, disguised but unmistakable. "Dad was tracking both of us?" Ryan asked. "We both were," Sarah confirmed, "taking turns, coordinating from a distance, making sure you were protected without knowing it." She smiled sadly. "Those times when things mysteriously worked out in your favor? The unexpected promotions, the lucky breaks." "That was you and Dad," James realized, "all along." Sarah nodded, then pulled out one final photograph that made both brothers catch their breath. It showed their father on his last day alive, sitting with Hank as a puppy. He was writing something in a small notebook, the same notebook they'd found in the cabin. Your father knew Thompson was closing, and Sarah explained. He had a choice: run with the evidence or make sure it reached the right hands eventually. He chose the harder path, the longer game. She looked at Hank. He spent his last days training Hank, teaching him not just to be a police dog, but to be a guardian, a protector of his real mission, bringing his family back together. Hank's ears twitched at his name, and he lifted his head to look at them with those intelligent eyes. Even injured, he maintained his watchful vigil over the family. The night your father died, Sarah continued, her voice quiet but steady, he left me a message: they'll try to break us apart. Let them think they succeeded. Sometimes a family has to shatter before it can be rebuilt stronger. James and Ryan exchanged looks, understanding dawning in their eyes. Everything, their separation, their different paths, even their pain, had been part of a longer plan, a parent's desperate gambit to protect their children and give them the strength to face what was coming. As evening settled over the clinic, Sarah pulled out one last item, a sealed DVD marked simply for my sons. With trembling hands, she inserted it into a small player borrowed from Dr. Watson's office. William Harlow's face appeared on the screen, recorded the day before his death. He looked tired but determined, his eyes kind as they had always been. Boys, he began, if you're watching this, then everything has either gone terribly wrong or exactly according to plan, maybe both. He smiled sadly. Thompson gave me a choice today. Turn over the evidence against him or he'd come after my family. What he doesn't understand is that I've already made my choice. The brothers sat in silence, their father's voice filling the small room. Ryan, son, I know you blame yourself for not being there that night. Don't. Everything you did undercover was exactly what I needed you to do. And James, my quiet one, I know you've spent years searching for answers. I'm sorry I couldn't give them to you sooner. William paused, looking down at something off screen. The camera angle shifted, showing a young Hank sleeping at his feet. This little fellow here, he's special. More than just a dog. He's my last message to you both. Everything I couldn't say, everything I needed you to understand about loyalty, about family, about standing together, I put it all into training him. He'll find his way to you when the time is right. Sarah wiped tears from her eyes as William continued. The night it happens, they'll make it look like an accident. Thompson's good at that. But I want you to know I'm choosing this, choosing to give you both time to grow strong enough to finish what I started. Your mother understands. She'll watch over you, even if you can't see her. He leaned closer to the camera, his eyes intense. The evidence isn't what matters. Thompson thinks this is about documents and hard drives, but he's wrong. This was always about family, about teaching my sons that real strength comes from standing together, not alone. The screen flickered as William stood, Hank now awake and alert beside him. I love you both, and when the time comes, when you're finally together again, remember the truth isn't in the files or the evidence. It's in what we choose to do for the people we love. The recording ended, but they sat in silence for a long moment. Hank moved slowly from his bed, despite his injuries, and placed his head on James's lap, then reached out to touch Ryan with his paw. He knew, Ryan said softly. He knew exactly how it would play out. Not how Sarah corrected. But he knew who you both would become. He believed in his sons, even when you didn't believe in yourselves. James scratched behind Hank's ears, understanding finally settling in his heart. He didn't die protecting evidence. He died giving his time to become strong enough to stand together. The truth of their father's last night didn't bring the closure they had expected. Instead, it opened something new, an understanding that his death hadn't been the end of something, but the beginning. A father's final lesson about love, sacrifice, and the true meaning of family. 2 days after watching their father's final message, James and Ryan sat on the porch of the old Montana cabin, now cleared as a crime scene. Hank lay between them, his bandages fresh from Dr. Watson's morning visit. The autumn air was crisp, carrying the scent of pine and approaching winter. Remember when Dad taught us to track here, Ryan asked, breaking the long silence. You were terrible at it. James laughed softly. Yeah, I kept following rabbit trails instead of deer. But you always covered for me. That's what big brothers do, Ryan paused, turning a small object in his hands, their father's old compass. I spent so many years angry, thinking he'd chosen you over me, sent me away because you were somehow better. "And I thought he'd taken you because you were stronger," James replied. "Spent years trying to prove I could be as tough as my big brother." Hank's tail thumped against the wooden boards, drawing their attention. The shepherd looked between them with what seemed like exasperation. "Dad's last partner," Ryan said, gesturing to Hank, "still teaching us lessons." "Remember what Dad used to say about his canine units?" James asked. "That dogs don't carry grudges, don't let pride get in the way of pack loyalty. Humans could learn a thing or two about forgiveness from them," Ryan quoted, smiling at the memory. He held out the compass to James. "I took this from Dad's office that last night. Thought it might lead me to some answers. Never realized the answer was just to find my way back home." James took the compass, noting how the needle swung true despite its age. "We both got lost for a while there, didn't we?" "Maybe that was part of Dad's plan too," Ryan suggested. "Sometimes you have to lose your way to appreciate finding it again." As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the porch, the brothers sat in a more comfortable silence. There was still much to say, years of misunderstandings to unravel, but the first steps had been taken. Hank shifted, resting his head on James's lap while extending a paw to touch Ryan's knee, maintaining contact with both brothers, keeping them connected just as their father had trained him to do. The FBI's field office buzzed with activity as James and Ryan sat in the briefing room. The recovered hard drive had revealed Thompson's entire network, corrupt officials, compromised agents, and a web of influence stretching through multiple agencies. Sarah stood at the front of the room, now officially reinstated as a senior agent. "Thompson was just the visible head," she explained, pointing to a complex organizational chart. "His death hasn't ended this. There are still people in power who benefited from Project Guardian. And they'll be desperate now," Ryan added, his shoulder still in a sling. "Nothing more dangerous than cornered animals." Hank, wearing his official K9 vest despite his injuries, sat alert between the brothers. The black shepherds that had defected during the forest confrontation were being rehabilitated, but Hank remained unique, a living link to their father's legacy. "We've identified 3 key targets," Sarah continued. "Judge Harrison, who signed off on covering up your father's death; Colonel Matthews, who supervised the K9 program's corruption; and Director Phillips, who orchestrated the whole operation." "They'll be protected," James noted, studying the files. "Legal immunity, private security, political connections." "That's why we're not going after them legally at first," Ryan smiled. "We're going to use their own tactics against them. Show them what it feels like to be hunted." The plan took shape over the next hour. Ryan's undercover experience, James's tactical skills, and Sarah's intelligence network would work together. But it was Hank who provided the unexpected advantage. The other reformed K9 still responded to his leadership, creating a network of 4-legged operatives that their targets would never suspect. "Dad always said the best plans are the simplest," James remarked, watching Hank interact with 2 of the black shepherds. "They're looking for complex operations, political moves. They won't expect to be undone by the very dogs they tried to corrupt." As they finalized the details, an urgent message came in. Judge Harrison had booked a private flight to a non-extradition country. They had less than 6 hours to act. "Ready for this?" Ryan asked his brother, checking his weapon. James looked at his family, his mother's determined expression, his brother's steady presence, and Hank's unwavering loyalty. "Together this time," he replied, "the way Dad always meant it to be." The operation unfolded with precision over 48 intense hours. Judge Harrison never made his flight. Instead, he found himself surrounded by evidence of his corruption delivered by shadows in the night. Colonel Matthews discovered his secure compound wasn't so secure when Hank and his reformed pack silently breached every defense. Director Phillips broke first, faced with the combined pressure of the Harlow family's coordinated assault on his carefully built walls of protection. One by one they fell. Not to violence or force, but to the weight of truth and the strength of a family united in purpose. The final confrontation took place in Phillips's office, high above the city. He sat behind his desk, his empire crumbling as the Harlows entered together. "You're just like your father," Phillips spat at James. He couldn't see the bigger picture either. "No," James replied calmly, Hank at his side. "Dad saw the biggest picture of all. He saw that family, real family, is stronger than any corrupt system. Ryan placed a file on the desk, their father's original evidence preserved all these years by their mother. "You have a choice," he said, "the same choice you gave our father. But this time the family you're facing is whole." Sarah stepped forward, her FBI badge gleaming. William Harlow died protecting a truth bigger than himself. His sons lived to deliver that truth. As Phillips was led away by federal agents, the Harlows stood together at the window, watching the sun rise over the city. Hank pressed against James's leg, his mission, the one William Harlow had trained him for, finally complete. "Dad would be proud," Ryan said softly. "Not of taking him down, but of how we did it. Together." That's what he was training us for all along, James realized. Every separation, every hardship, it was preparing us for this moment. Teaching us that real strength comes from standing together. Sarah wrapped her arms around her sons, tears in her eyes. "Your father once told me that the greatest victory isn't defeating your enemies. It's healing what they tried to break." Outside, the reformed K-9 units patrolled with their new handlers, their natural loyalty restored. Inside, a family stood whole again, their own loyalty tested by fire and proven unbreakable. A week later, the Harlow family gathered at their father's grave in the small Montana cemetery. The autumn leaves drifted around them as they stood together, Hank sitting solemnly between James and Ryan. The old headstone had been replaced with a new one, now bearing the true story of William Harlow's service and sacrifice. "There's one more thing," Sarah said, pulling an envelope from her coat. "Your father left this with his lawyer, to be opened only when the truth came out." Her hands trembled slightly as she broke the seal. Inside was a deed to the Montana cabin and a letter. "My dear family, if you're reading this, then you've done what I couldn't. You've brought the truth to light. But more importantly, you've found your way back to each other. The cabin isn't just a piece of property, it's where we were happiest, where we were truly a family. It's yours now, all of you, to build new memories. James, your quiet strength was always your greatest gift. Ryan, your fierce protection of those you love will serve you well. Sarah, my love, your courage in letting our boys find their own path was greater than any sacrifice I made. And to whoever has taken up my last partner's training, I trust Hank has proved himself worthy of the Harlow name. He carries a piece of all of us in his heart. Remember, a house is built of walls and beams, but a home is built of love and dreams. Love always. Dad." As Sarah read the last words, Hank let out a soft whine, pressing closer to James. The reformed K-9s, now part of a special FBI unit under Ryan's command, stood at respectful attention nearby. "He knew," James said quietly. "Even then, he knew we'd need a place to come back to." "A place to start again," Ryan added, placing a hand on his brother's shoulder. The morning sun broke through the clouds, warming the small family gathering. In that moment, they weren't agents or operatives or handlers. They were simply the family William Harlow had loved enough to sacrifice everything for. The Montana cabin came alive that evening. Lights glowed from every window as the extended Harlow family gathered for the first time in 20 years. Dr. Emily Watson had joined them, along with several of William's old K-9 unit colleagues who had remained loyal all these years. In the renovated living room, Hank lay by the fireplace, his injuries nearly healed, surrounded by his pack of reformed shepherds. James watched as his mother moved through the kitchen, teaching Ryan her secret recipe for the pot roast their father had loved so much. "Just like we used to do," came a gruff voice. Old Jack Turner, their father's first K-9 training partner, stood beside James, holding a faded photograph. He'd cooked for the whole unit after training. Said, "Good food makes good family." The photograph showed a younger William Harlow surrounded by his K-9 unit, all smiles and muddy uniforms. "I kept this all these years," Jack said, handing it to James, "waiting for the right time to pass it on." Sarah called everyone to dinner, the large oak table their father had built decades ago finally full again. As they settled in, Ryan stood, raising his glass. "Dad used to say that a meal shared is a memory made," he began, his voice thick with emotion. "For 20 years we ate alone, each of us carrying pieces of a broken family. But look at us now." Around the table, faces both familiar and new smiled back. Dr. Watson sat beside Sarah, sharing quiet memories of treating William's K-9 units. Jack Turner and his old team filled the room with stories of training days and missions accomplished. To William, Jack called out, raising his glass. Who taught us that family isn't just about blood, it's about who you choose to stand beside? To Dad, the brothers echoed. Hank raised his head at the toast, letting out a soft bark that made everyone laugh. The other shepherds joined in, their chorus a reminder of how far they'd all come. As the evening wore on, the cabin filled with laughter, stories, and the warmth of reunion. Sarah pulled out old photo albums, and soon the air was thick with memories shared and wounds finally healing. 1 year later, the Montana cabin had become a regular gathering place for the Harlow family. On this particular autumn morning, James sat on the porch with Hank, watching the sunrise paint the mountains gold. The German shepherd, now gray around the muzzle but still alert, kept his usual watchful position. Ryan emerged from the cabin carrying 2 steaming coffee mugs, settling into the chair beside his brother. Just got off the phone with Mom. She's flying in next week for the K-9 graduation ceremony. The ceremony would mark the first official class of what they now called the William Harlow K-9 training program, focused on developing genuine partnerships between handlers and dogs. Ryan oversaw the program while James handled field operations. The reformed shepherds had become instructors in their own right, with Hank serving as the program's elder statesman. Found this in Dad's old desk, Ryan said, pulling out a small notebook. Look at the last entry. The final page held their father's handwriting, dated the day before his death. Watch the boys today, James at the academy, Ryan deep undercover. They think they're walking separate paths, but they're more alike than they know. One day they'll understand that every step apart was leading them back together. Sarah sees it too. Our family isn't broken. It's just waiting for the right moment to rebuild. P.S. Hank's training is complete. He knows what to do. Trust him to bring him home. As if acknowledging his name, Hank stood and stretched, then moved to sit between the brothers just as he'd done countless times before. His mission, the one William Harlow had entrusted to him, was complete, but his vigilance never wavered. Dad would have loved this, James said softly. All of us here continuing his work. Not just his work, Ryan corrected. His legacy. Family, loyalty, truth, everything he lived for. Inside the cabin, photos lined the walls, old and new memories intertwined. William and Sarah's wedding picture hung beside a recent family portrait. The old K-9 unit photos shared space with images of the new training program. And in the center, the picture that had started it all, 2 young boys building a snowman, their laughter frozen in time. A new group of recruits would arrive tomorrow, handlers and dogs ready to learn the true meaning of partnership. But for now, in the quiet morning light, 2 brothers sat with their father's last and greatest gift between them, a dog who had helped heal a broken family and bring truth to light. Hank's tail thumped contentedly against the porch boards as the sun rose fully over the mountains. The morning air carried the scent of pine and possibility of endings become beginnings, of a legacy not just preserved but renewed. And somewhere William Harlow was smiling. What did you think about James and Hank's powerful bond and how loyalty and family became their greatest strength? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We'd especially love to hear about your own experiences with special bonds, whether with pets, family members, or someone who changed your life. Your stories matter to us. If you enjoyed this heartwarming tale of redemption and unconditional love, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications. We bring you meaningful stories that celebrate the unbreakable bonds between humans and animals, the strength of family, and the triumph of love over darkness. Did this story touch your heart? Share it with someone who needs a reminder that hope and healing are always possible, even in the darkest times. Every share helps spread these powerful messages of love, loyalty, and redemption to those who need them most. Together, we can inspire others to believe in the power of second chances and the enduring strength of family bonds.